This is a presentation of the Foreign Press Association of the United States, discussing American Fever, A Tale of Romance and Pestilence by Peter Christian Hall. Ian Williams, president of the FPA, interviews Mr. Hall about his experience researching American Fever and what that might suggest for our future with COVID-19.
Um, we discussed this some time ago. I had interviewed Peter for my radio program a long time ago about his book, American Fever, which he was working on. It was a work in progress. And he had been studying the epidemiology of the flu epidemics, how it worked, and considering specifically in our circumstances, how it would affect a city like New York when people started applying quarantine. And I think the main lesson we're getting from this is when confronted with the complete incompetence of governmental officials who fail to predict these things, as we're sort of living through an apocalypse that Peter predicted, other people have predicted. So, Peter, one of the questions which was asked through email was, how is this actual epidemic comparing with what you envisaged in the novel to begin with?
Well, that's a good question. Nice to see you, Ian. I'm sorry we're not in person. The two major things that I did not envision. My novel concerns a guy who's blogging in New York and selling masks, gloves, and goggles on the internet during an avian flu pandemic. And one thing that never occurred to me, as you can tell, is that there would not be any masks, gloves, and goggles for medical personnel. Basically, we're about to hit all of our hospitals and medical staff with this horrific virus, and they don't have gear. Which to cut to the chase on that one, people can simply be mowed down or put into quarantine because they got sick and they're not meant to infect their patients. And staff cuts, whole hospitals could be disabled by this, by the death and quarantining of their staffs. The second thing I never pictured, I made my character kind of like libertarian who's always trying to help people, and then he has a little crisis of what Ayn Rand might have said about it, which is pretty funny, and because he's a nice guy, and he wasn't going to comment on local politics or partisan politics. He was above all that. He was a libertarian. He didn't like either party, and I thought that made it easier to write the novel. But I never pictured I made a generic president, no gender, doing generic things as a president. I never pictured the administration we have now. And I never pictured an administration that would deny there was a problem while it ate the rest of the world. And I am flabbergasted, and I am frightened, not out of my wits, but I'm very, very concerned and scared for the people I love and my friends and the world in general.
Well, where does it come into, one of your strong points in the novel when you're plotting, because science fiction like this is in effect, it's a sort of, how should you say, it's a virtual experiment in politics and reality. Do you envisage that especially a president like this might decide that New York is a sort of cesspit of corona and should be isolated from the rest of the country? I mean, because New Yorkers, from his point of view, he's blamed the Chinese, he's blamed the French, he's blamed the Italians. New Yorkers are foreigners in his way of thinking as well, so he may as well blame us and cut us off as well. Do you think that's a feasible scenario?
Well, that hopefully is a bit extreme, although it has occurred to me. Look at what he did with California during the wildfires. He pretty much tried to cut off help and said they were doing it all wrong, tried to persuade the president of Finland that all the forests should be groomed every morning. I mean, the guy was flabbergasted also. Basically, there's a concern. The people who are most vulnerable in this moment, apart from the age question, are rural people in America. Their hospitals are basically crap. I mean, they're full of people trying to do their job, but they're very under-resourced, and they're very thinly arranged for the population. People have to travel 3-4 hours in some states to get near a hospital, and those people who live in those areas are the biggest supporters of the president. They have until very recently denied that this was a problem, and they're not prepared. A bunch of Democrats went off and got prepared because they were scared about the virus. Perhaps being more international, they had friends in other countries, corresponded with them, read foreign newspapers. I don't know, but the people in Idaho and places like that are simply not ready. And I don't know if it's possible for them to get it all ready, but they also are going to be vastly underserved medically. In New York, we may run out of ICU beds and ventilators very quickly, and then the death rate would, of course, rise because there would not be the kind of treatment that keeps the death rate for this condition as low as it has been in many places. It could be much worse here if people simply aren't being treated when they're in serious condition. But basically, Trump would have an excuse for diverting resources to his red states because they are going to, they look to me like they're going to be absolutely smacked by this. And that would lead him to perhaps start, cutting off aid to New York, New Jersey, California, and states that he does not expect votes from. I don't know how bad this could get. I know that it's been utterly mismanaged. We are still lied to about things like testing, and now they're short of Q-tips to process tests with. I mean,
No.
it's catastrophic what's going on, and it hasn't really started yet.
Well, one of the aspects which we've actually dealt with today, we sent a statement from the Foreign Press Association deploring the fact that China is now kicking out the Washington Post, Time, and New York Times correspondents. And of course, this follows on the US throwing out Chinese correspondents, beginning with the Wall Street Journal people being thrown out precisely for reporting on this. And one of the things that's kept us sane and allowed us to hold politicians' feet to the fire across the world is that we can look across and see what's happening in other countries. Like in Britain, they saw what was happening in Italy, and eventually Boris Johnson and you mentioned her, his Ayn Rand acolytes have had to eat their words, if not their viruses, as a result of being totally debunked by reality in the form of Italy and the rest of Europe. And one of our few harbingers of sanity with the great Midwest and the great Trump cultists is what happens in other countries. So he's tried to claim it will only happen in other countries. Even the people in the big middle there will have to look and say, well, this is what's happening in Britain. This is what's happening in France and Germany, as well as China. And we should do something about it. Do you think that this flow of information is, I don't want to be paranoid, but do you think it's coincidental that they want to cut off this flow? Both parties involved here, both Beijing and Washington.
Well, there's a couple of points I'd like to make about what you said. I've been going to Breitbart.com throughout this time, last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, to see the comments under the articles concerning coronavirus. And they've changed over time, but there is still an extraordinary amount of denial there, and xenophobia and just anti-democrat rhetoric. Even George Soros popped up for a long stretch in one of the coronavirus things because there's an argument that he's spreading this. It's really scary. I don't think they're going to necessarily bow to the weight of any information from foreign countries. As far as China and the U.S. goes, this is very Monty Python-esque in a way. It's like the world is burning and these guys are like throwing pies at each other. But I think China's pretty pissed off about the Chinese virus thing.
Did you see one Chinese correspondent said today that a White House official referred to it as Kung Flu, and she's Asian American, so she was not happy about this. I mean, it's not that they're casual, it's not that they're stupid, but they're so overtly and transcendently stupid.
Well, I did see an interesting comment from someone on Twitter that, why doesn't anybody complain about the name African swine flu? They should rename that. But at any rate, as far as China goes, I think they're going to start pressing their case against Trump, and they're going to rub his face in it. And the reason why, we desperately need Chinese factories to crank out as much stuff as they can and get it here.
Well, you saw today that the
We are
first shipment
down.
of masks, etc., from Shanghai is on the way, thanks to
Yes.
Jackie Ma, a Chinese oligarch and plutocrat.
Right. So we are in the most wretched shape. Nobody's moving in the country. Everything's going to break down for a while. Of this 2-week hiatus is nothing. I mean, you're either going to do it for longer or it was a complete waste of time. 2 weeks from now, New York's going to be absolutely jam-packed with very sick people. And what? They're going to tell people they can go back to work? No. This 2-week hiatus is a foot in the water that is going to have to get deeper if it is to have any positive effect. But I do think that China is basically thinking that they have the United States by the short hairs at this time, and that if it's going to be about exchanging insults, they're really going to let Trump have it. What's he going to do? Restart the trade war? He's got a potential depression on his hands at this point. The stock market goes up and down as traders will have it, but the general pattern is down quite sharply, and it will probably do so again tomorrow. This is a very bad situation in terms of the United States insulting anybody.
And of course, you've touched on it there. The breakdown. This is a precipitating factor, a sort of catalyst for the perfect storm. I mean, we have impending war with Iran, which keeps getting threatened. We have a financial meltdown happening. We have just-in-time trade disappearing across the world. We have aeroplanes that are falling out of the sky with the blessing and connivance of the Federal Aviation Authority. I think that sort of all of the elements of trust that sort of and imagination that keep the markets afloat are all tending towards deflation in a big way, a catastrophic bubble burst. And how can we cope with a major economic crisis and a pandemic like this at the same time?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, the pandemic has wrecked the markets, the financial markets, fine, but that is unveiling all sorts of incredible tensions about credit. All these big companies, Boeing whipped into a $15 billion credit line in seconds. Blackstone told all its companies that it controls to draw down all their credit. The banks don't have any money. Mortgage rates went up in the United States last week with credit, with the interest rate heading to zero, because they can't loan any money. They don't have the cash. They don't want people knocking on their doors to refinance their homes. The system is basically breaking down to various degrees, as one might perceive, and we're not. And on top of it, there's talk that there's going to be a second wave of this thing, as with influenza. If it calms down over the summer, that it will come back in the fall, maybe very harshly. There's no prospect of a vaccine indefinitely. And
also there have been reports that in fact nobody is sure that having the virus confers immunity afterwards.
That's my nightmare. There was a good piece in the BBC that some Australians had a woman from Wuhan. They sampled her. She had a mild case. They sampled all her stuff, and they found 4 cells that seem to indicate an immune response. That's how simple things are now. That's as far as we've gotten. We are all celebrating them, that some Australians isolated some immune cells that seem to have gone active in the case of a mildly sick person. That's what we know now. That's awful. So Boris Johnson's idea of the British attaining herd immunity is the worst joke on people I know there who are aging, because you can suppose everybody gets herd immunity in May. How good is that even going to be in September? Will any of those people be immune to this particular coronavirus at that time? No one knows.
Well, the other part that you deal with in your novel, which is good for novels, is the social breakdown that's involved, the lack of social cohesion, and the desperate straits. We've got millions of people trapped in a fairly small area, locked in if the governor and the government and the mayor say so. Who's going to provide food and medical aid? Who's going to pick up the bodies from the apartments where they're dying? Who's going to pick up the patients from the bodies? How does it all work? For 30 years, our governments have been destroying social cohesion and the whole idea of communitarian responses. New York is probably better equipped than most, but it's still pretty dire compared with most standards.
Well, by any by accounting standards of neoliberalism, preparedness is a waste of money. It doesn't save you money every year. It doesn't make things work more efficiently. It's a wasted resource to have mountains of masks lying around, or even vaccine. It goes bad over time. Stores of medicines go bad over time. You want just in time. That's what ought to be done. In this case, it is going to, I think, lead to a pretty serious legitimation crisis in the United States, in Britain, and in other places if it gets as bad as it seems obviously headed for. In my novel, I tried to picture really everything that could go wrong. I told you how I failed at that. And
you did well. You did well.
Thank you. I did have long stretches where no one can get corpses picked up, and they're burying them in Central Park. He bikes around Manhattan because everybody's just biking and scootering and walking. There's no cars. And he goes through Central Park at one point, and the police are chasing people, and he didn't know why. And he gets home and realizes no one's picking up corpses. Maybe they were burying them in the park. And then he's like, what did they do? Did they make them take the corpses with them when they caught them? And then it turns out that people got caught burying them in Tompkins Square Park, near where my protagonist lives. And his old friend dies, and her Irish boyfriend can't get anyone to pick up the corpse. My guy has a few connections because he's been involved with a volunteer group. That's what gets him in trouble. He gets involved in a DIY volunteer group in the East Village, and ultimately the government doesn't like this. We're in a very sensitive situation after if this goes on for like 6 weeks, people are going to be really pretty crazed and looking for things to sink their teeth into. People look for things they can control. And one of the points of my novel is that pandemics invite repression. All the fear, anxiety, and genuine vulnerability on people's part makes them want to find something they can control. And at one point in my novel, Houston blows up. All those chemical plants, they're always vulnerable. They blow up every year, in fact, but not all at once. So that is deemed to be, that's something Department of Homeland Security could do something about, having not done much about the pandemic in my novel. They can look for terrorists. And suddenly the government starts cracking down on everything. And the DIY community group that my protagonist has been helping becomes a government target, because it's a bunch of East Village anarchists helping people with free food and deliveries. And they're charged with maintaining a place for people to gather at and all that. Things take a hard turn, and I'm scared of that.
How can you see? How is it comparing from what you see? I mean, I went to the supermarket this afternoon, and Saturday there was a run on eggs. All the eggs had gone. Today, they'd even taken all the organic produce, and I mean, that's going to be compost in 2 days. So why anyone would want to hold it? Being a carnivore, I don't do vegetarian, but hoarding organic vegetables that will go rotten in 2 days is not the most rational response, any more than collecting toilet paper.
No, I disagree. My wife is an excellent cook, and we've grabbed vegetables, and she's making soups out of them, and we're freezing them.
Okay, well, you can do. Okay.
a nice little Tupperware full of soup is a meal of greens for two people, far into the future if necessary. So we've actually been clever at stocking. When I had to go to England for a funeral a few weeks ago, the day before I left, I went to a health food store in Manhattan and bought all kinds of lentils and chickpeas and got a hold of a sealing machine, and I sealed them all. I've got bags of that stuff, and my wife can do miracles with them. It's very useful to think about things that you actually can store over a period of time. And the greens might seem stupid, but soup, yes.
Salt cod is my answer. Salt cod.
Well, yeah. Endangered species.
My Nordic blood coming out.
Yeah.
So, Jonathan, do we have any questions out there?
We have one from earlier. Let me pull that up.
No, we dealt with that right at the beginning. So,
yes. No, I don't see anyone with any direct questions right now.
Well, we can.
We have Jeff here with his hand raised. I'd love to let him ask the question directly.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Being with us today. It's all in the timing, I suppose. My question is, when did you get the idea and when did you begin to put pen to page?
Well, I was rather taken by the SARS epidemic back in, I think, 2003. And I'm not trained in these matters really, but I'm not stupid. And I started researching, and I saw this incredible social vulnerability opening up really all over the world. And SARS went away because it was very easily traced with temperature controls. Nasty disease, but yeah. And I saw also things like, I remember there was a case in Cleveland, maybe someone died, but it was the NBA playoffs were going to be that night, and the Cavaliers or something were going to play. And nobody was going to give up their tickets. It was like, yeah, they waited all these years to see this team in the playoffs. They were going to go. And I realized in New York, if people were dying right and left and the Knicks were playing and they had a chance, people were going to go. And I realized Americans were not, the sort of people who were going to cooperate in a health emergency. And that really whetted my appetite. But SARS went away. So then H5N1 came along and was really scaring people for a couple of years. And so I started learning about influenza. And I lived through a couple of pandemics in my life, and they were interesting. I don't eat split pea soup because I was fed split pea soup when I was about 6 during a fierce pandemic. And my sisters and I barfed for about 3 days. And
the Asian flu, I think, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I can't go near split pea soup. It's not interesting. So I've been affected by these things. So I got into this, and I realized I was trying to write a different book, and I was like, the only thing that excites me to do research on when I wake up in the morning is this H5N1. So I said, okay, I'm going to write about it. And I came up with the construct. And it's a long story, but at any rate, I had quite a hot literary agency, very, very interested in it. And I was engaged in a rewrite for them, or tweaking it. And then I noticed that the agent was giving a lot of money to this hot young politician. And my book kind of assumed a kind of Republican state of governance in America to a degree. And Obama came along and gave everyone so much hope, and all interest in my novel just evaporated. So I continued. And then the H1N1 kind of floppy pandemic came along, and I put it out as a serial novel at that time online because it's a blog novel. So it comes in short bursts, several pages at the most. So I posted it all that summer as a serial novel. That's the first time that's how I met Ian, in fact. And he interviewed me about that. And then the book came out in 2012. And there was no particular, I guess I put it out the week Contagion was coming out. which was, you know, reasonably clever. I changed my pub date, and it's been out since then. And I must say it is pretty prescient. There was something I was reading about today that utterly reminded me of a tiny point in my novel. The novel is romantic, I'd like to say. It's he's living with one woman at the start, and he's missing one at the end, and it's pretty exciting once the thing really gets going. It's a page turner. Um, Basically, anything that can go wrong does go wrong. And the great thing about the novel, as far as I'm concerned, is that a woman I barely knew bought it, reviewed it for Amazon, and invited me to a party. And my poor protagonist is always trying to get out of New York City and get upstate. And I'm from upstate, so that kind of coded with my own mental DNA, and it's also safer probably. And anyway, we were married 16 months after she invited me to the party after liking my novel. And we got a place upstate. So we're here. And that's kind of a very strange narrative frame around my book. Writing the book got me where I am today in the pandemic that I rather well described.
It's funny, lots of literary novels are about the toils and troubles of novelists, how to write novels, but yours would actually make a good story in its own right.
Yeah, I'm flabbergasted that this is how it turned out.
So, we have a couple other questions. Simon Locke is asking, as a journalist, what questions do you think other journalists should be asked right now that maybe they are not asking?
I think personally, I think you know, they're going on about vaccines, and 20 million companies are claiming to have legs up on vaccines and hoping their stock won't collapse. I'm not, you know, the vaccine thing is pretty far off, and it's not for me to judge. You know, I can see the ones that are total crap, but I can't judge the others. I can pray that there will be one. The question of immunity that Ian mentioned earlier is probably the key thing for all of us, whether you're just a business person worried about whether your business will survive, a religious leader worried about your flock, a person worried about their family. Do we get immunity from this? How long does it last? There's a lot of people running around thinking that, you know, they're young enough. If they get the virus now, they'll just have done with it. They'll avoid old people so that they don't kill anybody, but they can just, you know, get it and have it done with. That's not remotely established. And there's also the question that getting it can harm your lungs. A lot of people who survive this thing have damaged lungs, and suppose it comes back or something else comes back. I think the question of immunity is something that journalists should look at. They should also really, local journalists should look very, very hard at what is available to deal with people who become seriously ill. You know, beds, ventilators, Q-tips, whatever it is. This is what people need to know. And also, I guess, also to press people with hay fever not to go running off to medical facilities where they might actually catch coronavirus. It's always good to repeat the key symptoms and the key issues. And I wish to urge everyone to have, I bought a backup thermometer. We all need thermometers. We must have thermometers. If you do not have, I feel feverish right now. I'm a degree under the 98.6, which is my norm. I'm always a degree or two under that. But I'm 1 degree under today. I'm slightly feverish. I have hay fever. The global warming ended the winter really early. You know, there's pollen everywhere. This is a terrible time for neurotic people to be worrying about coronavirus.
If you sneeze on a subway platform at the moment in New York, you might get pushed under the way temperatures, emotional temperatures are rising.
Are people really angry?
I think that all I've, well, my girlfriend who is from the Philippines looks Oriental, and she says she gets funny looks if she coughs on the subway. There are lots of anecdotal people in the Asian American community have been
Yeah,
reproached, and it's gone beyond funny looks. There have been people attacked here,
yes,
and even in Britain. Only yesterday, a Chinese nurse, National Health Service nurse, going for a 12-hour night shift, was attacked on her way to work for being Chinese. So, that's the British. We're supposed to have a stiff upper lip.
Hmm. No, it's god awful that people can be that stupid in a crisis. It's incredible. We had a moment in St. James Park in London a couple of weeks ago where we were crossing that little bridge toward the bandstand, and I saw massive people ahead of us, and somebody was gesticulating and speaking loudly, and I realized it was a tour, and I realized she was speaking Italian, and I had my moment of, oh my God, and I just whipped my scarf over my mouth, and my wife did as well, and we plunged through, but we had no hard feelings toward them. I did wonder afterward, like, would I like to wander around London right now with a group of people speaking Italian loudly? And I'm thinking, no, not really.
It's not likely there.
Okay, I have another question.
Please.
Do you expect there to be long-term changes to Americans' behavior after they experience this? And I think, and then we have one more right after that, but let's go with that.
I'm afraid there will be all kinds of changes. My novel proceeds with some serious authoritarian behavior on the part of the government. As I said, pandemics invite repression because people are so frightened. They want a strong state. I really pray that this goes away fast, because America is not psychologically attuned to any positive adjustment from this kind of crisis. Certainly the president is going to attempt to focus popular unease on what he regards as his enemies, and anything but himself, and may well do this very successfully. I don't know. I don't know how nasty things are going to get. I know a lot of people are buying guns as if they don't have enough already. And I'm very, very, very worried. I don't see the grounds for an improvement. I do think it's interesting that the issue that carried the day for the Democrats in 2018, which was not actually Trump, it was the American popular interest in healthcare. That is going to be front and center in November, because a lot of people will have lost people or suffered immensely or been financially mangled over this. So that may counterbalance the xenophobic, angry, scapegoating tendency in terms of maybe mothers in these families thinking, well, yeah, healthcare would be a good thing to have. I don't really know. I really hope that in Britain and here, two countries I know well, people can sort of like lift their heads a bit and look beyond, immediate angers and fears.
Beyond Britain and here, one of the interesting things about taking examples from abroad is to see how, I believe, the French, the Spanish, and the Italians in various forms have now declared a moratorium on mortgages, on repossessions, on rent, on utility bills, and taking the type of action that many of us hoped Obama would have done after the last financial crisis, but didn't. So do you think there's any chance that this is going to precipitate it? I saw today that I believe New York State has suspended the execution of eviction warrants. I mean, is this going to lead to the execution of marshals and landlords who try to evict people into this crisis?
I don't really know. Trump, interestingly, I've been waiting for him to actually listen to someone in his crew explaining to him that this crisis allows him to do the old helicopter money trick that Ben Bernanke was trying to pioneer, or certainly created the groundwork for, which is to send money to everyone in a society. Hong Kong sent everyone $1,200 about 6 weeks ago, and I don't, I think the people were pretty pleased. And now Trump is is pushing to send us all $1,000 each, which will be actually nothing compared to what the average family without benefits is going to spend without salaries. But and to people who have money won't mean much. But every president facing a tough reelection loves the idea of sending everybody $1,000. Now, as far as doing bold moves that actually help ordinary people, I don't know. I mean, the Steve Bannon types who may still have access to him would probably preach that. Bannon has not been saying this was a bad joke. Bannon's been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks that this is a genuine crisis. If he and Trump get back together, you could see all sorts of kind of populist devices to help ordinary Americans. I would not mind that. I mean, I think, as I said, the red state people are really looking to get rammed by this, and I don't think that's in anyone's interest.
We have another question just come in from Deb Lariver. Is it one of the things we've down here in Galveston in Houston, Texas, is a refusal of local officials to make the call to cancel gatherings or to shut down restaurants, etc., with deference to the state or to the feds, citing citizenry being unwilling to follow. In fact, it looks like they're going to have a huge explosion of spring breakers all across the southern state beaches soon.
They are.
Comments on that?
Well, yeah. I posted something on Facebook today. I forget where it was from. No, I think it was from Bloomberg. There was in South Padre Island, I think the whole place is full of screaming teens, and they're partying and drinking their Coronas. And it had a vicious quote in it from the guy who owns the bar that runs the stage that everybody probably does wet t-shirt contests on or something. And he's like, you tell these kids to use condoms, you tell them to socially distance, don't get too close to each other. They just don't listen. Well, why? He's created a monstrous, attractive nuisance, and they're all going to get sick there. Well, they might not have symptoms, and then they can go back and give it all to their grandmothers. Anyway, yeah, I loved his complaining. Like, he's just making all the money, but it's their fault. And we're going to see a lot of that. Florida's full of parading teens right now. This is America. It's not going to, some Kid Rock, who thankfully did not run for Senate in Michigan a couple of years ago. He has a bar in Nashville, and he's saying he refuses to close it. It's unconstitutional.
Did I see Lewis Friedman trying to come in?
Well, I have one more question quickly
that
was written in. This one is from Allie. What is the most reliable tech model to track this disease? Johns Hopkins? Is there a model that is in real time?
No, I haven't even looked at the Johns Hopkins thing. I mean, given that the testing has been so poor, I mean, what is it? What does the number of cases mean? I'm trying to look past all the static. I mean, the world is full of staticky things. I mean, as I said, my thing is, anything about immunity, and practical things. If a city gets overrun, yeah, I'm deeply concerned, and I will read about it. I personally find that to stay up to the moment on things, there's a bunch of people on Twitter who are very, very useful. One of whom is a Republican guy who ran the FDA until, I think, last spring, who was a big Trump supporter, but he actually, Gottlieb, and he actually has a lot of intelligent things to say, so Trump will probably never appoint him to anything. But I thought he was going to be appointed czar that day that Trump was making a big harumph and appointed Mike Pence. Gottlieb actually could run things properly and actually get along with the Trump people. He's been too critical now, probably. So Gottlieb is one, Lori Garrett. There's a thing called COVID-19 on Twitter, and their H5N1 is a blog that also has a Twitter presence, and you can quickly see who they're posting, and you can amass a list of 10 or 15 Twitter posters, Twitterers, tweeters.
I think possibly the final question is coming in from Lewis Friedman. You've alluded to politics. What about the election? What could or should the Democrats do?
I think Trump has just been cursed with the worst possible event. He cannot say to anybody who is logical that he didn't see it coming, or we're all been blindsided or black swanned. I tried to buy masks on January 21st. How long ago was that? You know, I'm not the president. His health people knew this was a serious thing in Wuhan by then. I think the Democrats need to play up. They don't have to be Medicare for all, but they certainly need to be. We sure need to fix our health system. We've got a track record of trying to do it, and you know that's important. They need to be sensible and farsighted, and keep their cool and do a good job locally. I think Pelosi probably could have gotten more out of the government with the bills she's passed. I don't always understand what she's doing. I don't know what she's going to do about Trump's idea of sending everybody $1,000. It'd probably come with a personal note.
Sick pay would be a start, though, wouldn't it? The idea that somebody has to make a choice between going into work and infecting everybody or staying home and starving their children and not paying their rent. Because that's the stark choice that this society offers, isn't it?
It's not a choice. Nobody, this is America. Nobody's going to not go to work when they are not feeling
ill. Sneeze their way all down the number 6 train.
Well, they're gonna say, I'm not sick. I've got to work. You know, there's no support for anything. And what I'm supposed to, I think the tests are now supposed to be free, but people where I am now are posting that they can't get a hold of tests. Nobody can get tested. We still don't have enough tests in this country. South Korea has tested so many more people already than we'll have tested by next month. It's just catastrophic. I'm sorry. I wish I had something more positive to say. As far as what the Democrats can do, they can keep their cool. I personally am terrified that their 2 leading candidates are both, older men who could easily be wiped out by the
target age group.
Yeah, and Trump and the 2 Democrats could all be wiped out 10 days from now by this disease. And it would not be a remarkable thing.
Well, let's hope in this particular 3P game, the right shell gets picked. But we can't bank on that. Jonathan, are we finishing now?
Well, I don't have any more questions. If anyone has a question, I think there were a couple people who might have tried to chime in. But I think this is last call for questions. And if not, I think we are adjourning from this fascinating. Oh yes, actually, I have one more. So we have one question, which is what is from Simon, what is the long-term impact on the economy? And then also, one other one is, in this terrible crisis, is nature trying to tell us something?
Okay, well, there's 2. The economic damage, this is not a situation that modern markets have experienced previously. And as I said earlier, cracks in our financial system, which was never really fixed after 2008, are starting to manifest again. There is a credit squeeze going on, and the Fed is now out of bullets as far as cutting interest rates go. Whatever goes wrong for us economically now, there is no easy approach to try to fix it. And that's true of most of the world. I mean, the European banks, which have been in such a jam for so many years, are back in the soup in a big, big way. I really wonder if Deutsche Bank's going to make it through this little bit. So I think economically, it's I know I see on the Breitbart comments, it's like, I'm buying the dip. And if that's happening, those people are getting cleaned out every 2 days. It's economically, I think we're in uncharted waters. If globalization is reversed, that's going to, of course, create opportunities for some companies. It's going to mangle some others. Okay, if you're a great investor, you can sort it out. Maybe you can make some money off that. I
That
think
was one of the points that was made that, 20 years ago, Wuhan didn't have an international airport. Now it has an international airport with direct flights to 20 or 30 cities around the world.
Yeah.
So, 25 years ago, this could have died out in the market with a few bats and been there. But now, by the time they'd noticed it, it was already traveling around the world at 580 miles an hour, whatever Boeings do now when they're flying straight.
Well, I think that brings us back to the other question about nature. I think there have been things like this cropping up locally throughout human history. Viruses are amazing, amazing entities. I urge anyone with an interest in science to look into what actually a virus is and where they may have come from. There's an argument that we are the descendants of viruses that landed in the primordial ooze, having blown in from outer space. If they came from Mars, we are, in fact, Martians. So, no, I'm not insane. So anyway, I find all that fascinating. But nature-wise, every time we tear down a rainforest, every time we bust up a natural setting, we are driving the denizens of that setting to look for some way to survive. Viruses can do very, very well if they attach to people. People are the strongest species on Earth. People are everywhere. People are tricky. If a virus can place with us, it's better than placing with birds. And I learned all this with the bird flu stuff. Most of our diseases come from animals. This is not some new thing. Zoonotic disease is not some new menace. Tuberculosis comes from cows. We domesticated cows a long time ago. We got TB. Influenza comes from ducks. They don't develop new species of influenza just because they hate us. They develop them from feasting on the water in pig farms in China. And they pick up all kinds of horrible microbes that merge with the influenza they carry quite naturally in their stomachs. So yeah, our view toward nature is forever painting us into an ever smaller corner. And that is one of my pet peeves when something like this pops up, is all the people claiming it has to have been man-made, all the talk about the lab in Wuhan. And I'm perfectly prepared to have a sensible conversation about maybe they were doing vaccine research and it slipped out because the Chinese are really sloppy with their stupid labs. But as far as biological weapons, no. You don't make a biological weapon out of something that everybody on Earth is eventually going to catch. That is not a targeted weapon. But it all brings me back to when everybody was worried about HIV in the 1980s, and a certain set of people, right or left, went on and on about how the CIA invented HIV. And it's just this, I talked before about agency and control. People like to believe that things can be controlled. So if they think it was man-made, then they just have to find the guy who was responsible for it. And then they might somehow control it. But nature, who controls nature? Yes, we are slowly destroying it, but we don't control it. And nature is going to be here when we're gone. Nature is going to be here.
One of the points that epidemiologists are making is that the very mildness that Trump was alluding to about about the coronavirus is what helps it pass. Because if you've got Ebola, you're dead before you can get far to transmit it. But with this, it's very mild, it's asymptomatic, it spreads a long, long way, it's very infectious. And, the point of a virus is not to kill people. That's almost incidental. That's collateral damage. It's to reproduce itself. So this reproduces people across this reproduces itself because it's so mild, because people are walking around and ambulatory and going around and sneezing up and down the number 1 train and the number 6 train, or shaking hands at APAC or Mar-a-Lago. It's very mild. This is what makes this so dangerous, because it spreads. So the 3 or 4% that die as a result, but, you know, it's very distressing, especially for those of us that are likely to be amongst the 3 or 4%, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the problems with Ebola. Ebola is a really, really fierce virus that kills people very, you know, fast. And it's a crappy virus for circulating as it might wish to do. This is really one of the most communicable, you know, look, a lot of colds we get, a lot of little flus we get are not flu. They're coronaviruses in the winter. And that's where Rush Limbaugh and Trump were going on about it's just a cold, but it's not a cold. Oh my God, that was my cat. Monkus always makes his
flu, that's the one to watch.
Monkus. Anyway,
Shall we wind up now, Jonathan?
There's one question that you kind of touched on already, which was, given this kind of, you know, given the outbreak, should we slow down our greed-driven ambitions and look at our behavior and, you know, and see how we can better take care of the planet as a way to protect ourselves?
Yes.
I certainly think so. I've been quite in favor of that position for a long time. If we continue on this path, we'll have many more weird devices to play with in 10 years. The planet will be far more wrecked. There will be more people, and we will be more vulnerable to such events. Yeah, the human race really would be wise to kick back, take a good look at things, consider global warming very seriously. There's some very nasty jokes about, oh my God, there's a virus. I'm going to go hide in the woods for 6 months if necessary to avoid getting it. Hey, where's the concern about global warming? The planet's basically going to kill us all in 50 years, a lot worse than this virus is if things continue. People don't have judgment. I don't see it in the human race. I think this is a really good case of what idiots we are.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. And I'm pleased to say that Peter has been approached by some major publishers to republish and up the book. And if ever there was a moment for a publisher to jump and seize the time of a ready-made, on-the-shelf, pre-laid out book on such a, let's say, extremely topical subject at the moment. But thank you all for attending our inaugural electronic meeting of the Foreign Press Association. And we'll be trying to do more of these over the next few weeks and try and relieve everybody of the stare craziness in your cabins there and wherever you are. We will try to pull this together more often and keep you informed and let you get your dispatches out without having to venture out and get lung full of viruses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian and John.